Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Keeping It Real with Your Communities for Public Education. We are so excited to delve into an open and honest conversation with today's speakers. But before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe peoples whose presence here continues to this day. We would also like to acknowledge that this is the treaty lands of the First Nations of the Williams Treaty and thank them and other Indigenous people for sharing this land with us. Finally, we acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as our closest Indigenous community. Since we are meeting virtually and we may not be in the same place, I highly encourage you to visit nativeland.ca to learn more about the land that you are on. I do want to emphasize that while a land acknowledgement is important in recognizing the role that colonial and neo-colonial ideologies and practices continue to have on Indigenous peoples, it is not enough. A land acknowledgement is only a bunch of words if we do not attach meaning, knowledge, and action to these words. It is not just a statement that Indigenous people may have been here at some point long ago. What it means is that in the case of York Region, Indigenous people lived here as families and as a community. This was and is their land in many ways that it can never be ours, and we must acknowledge that. We also want to add that in these times marred by upheaval, tension, and failing education policies and practices, it is our hope that this land acknowledgement also serves as a broader message to everyone that we are committed to the hard work of building more inclusive, respectful, and equitable school communities. We welcome the relationships we will build on our journey to a better tomorrow. With that, I would like to pass it over to Shamila, my co-chair, to tell you a little bit about why we are here today.
Thank you, Ria. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Keeping It Real with Your Communities this evening. As Ria mentioned, I'm just going to go through a little bit about why we're here, and then we're going to be introducing you to some fantastic guests this evening. So as many of you know, we are gathering this evening in response to our rejected delegation request. YRDSB trustees initially discussed it and agreed to hear our voices, those of educators, parents, and students. Then a week later, trustees spent 70 minutes discussing it again and voted against it. So in fairness, there were actually 5 trustees who did vote to hear our delegations. And Ria is just going to put up the list of trustees who voted for and against hearing our voices at tomorrow. It would have been at tomorrow's board meeting. So it was a little bit confusing because Trustee Bob McRoberts put forth a motion to refer us to senior board staff because he felt strongly that the decision to go with the hybrid model was an operational decision. Trustee Juanita Nathan commented that they should not allow the delegation because it would just get our hopes up and then they would not be able to do anything about it. Unfortunately, they failed to get the bigger picture, which is the importance of honoring the voices of all stakeholders, including parents and educators. So we urge each of you to reach out to your trustees and express your thanks or your dismay. And just a reminder that the next municipal election takes place in the fall of 2022. That's when we'll have an opportunity to vote for our education trustees once again. Please pay attention to how your trustees are voting, what they're doing during the meetings, what they're doing when you reach out to them. Trustees, as you know, are also responsible for selecting the Director of Education. On that note, we were referred, based on the vote that occurred, we were referred to senior board staff who did reach out by email this week, and we politely declined that opportunity to meet with them. We chose instead to share what would have been our delegation at a board meeting in a public forum with families and educators who are in this battle as a unified front. We're happy to include student voice, parent voice, and educator voice in this forum. We will not be silenced, and we will ensure that everyone gets to hear the truth about the impact of the disastrous hybrid model. Interestingly, senior board staff have requested that we share our data with them. And I'm happy to do so with the provision that the board's research staff provide the data that we've been asking for since June, which is the thought exchange data that apparently was used to make the decision to go with the hybrid model in the spring. So it's now October. My trustee and I are still waiting for those data, so we'll wait and see what happens. But for the sake of transparency, I'm happy to share the data without names of our teachers and students and families, and we can do a little exchange. So let's see if that actually happens. So I'm going to turn it back to Ria to introduce our first amazing guest this evening.
Thank you, Shamila. So to help us all gain a better understanding of the origins and trajectory of the hybrid model, I would now like to introduce the amazing Behan Farhadi, who is currently a postdoctoral visitor in the Faculty of Education at York University and a research associate with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. She is also a secondary teacher at the TDSB and an advocate for a fully funded anti-oppressive public education system. She has earned a master's in English from York University and a PhD in geography from U of T. Her dissertation research examined the relationship between e-learning and educational inequality in the TDSB. And Behan has written about the dangers of the hybrid model and emergency response to COVID-19 pressures that reflected a failing plan for online education. As a parent, secondary and post-secondary educator, and a researcher of educational policy, online learning, and inequality, she wears many hats and can definitely offer insight into what we have to lose if we proceed with the hybrid model for the rest of this school year. So I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Behan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. That's such a warm, generous, kind welcome. I'm really honored to be in spaces like this because it doesn't matter how many articles are written, how many books are published, as long as it's not until communities mobilize that harmful policies can be fought against. So thank you to the organizers for doing this, to your communities for public education, to all of the work of the local in trying to raise awareness about this policy. So I'm speaking about hybrid learning, which is a crisis model of education. It's referred to in different jurisdictions as different things. Hybrid is used most frequently in Ontario, largely because we had an American consulting firm who had popularized this model, and it was referenced in the first school board to implement it in Upper Canada district. And it's referred to otherwise as high flex, hybrid flexible, concurrent hybrid, concurrent, blend flex. And so it's really hard to kind of gather information. And I would suspect in some ways this is a feature of crisis as we try to figure out what language to use. In practice, though, in K-12, it's really been a split attention, fractured model of education, especially, with our most vulnerable students. It's historically been used to refer to the integration of offline and online education, but it's not used at the same time. The model has had more formal beginnings in 2006 in San Francisco State University in order to recruit graduate students who are working full-time job, who were at a greater distance away from school for a master's degree program. And there is a book about this model that's published by Professor Brian Beatty, and it's available for free, in which he describes what he calls this kind of student-directed multimodal experience. And students choose in these contexts in a graduate program where they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars for tuition. And so they're choosing between attending and participating in class in a traditional classroom, often lecture-based, or in an online environment. And online participation is not always synchronous. It might be asynchronous, sometimes both, sometimes only in one online mode. And there's been many attempts to kind of brand this model of education, but it hasn't really picked up in undergraduate programs. Even in graduate programs, it's not very common. For graduate students, what's made it successful? Well, it requires personal and technical resources, hardware, a reliable network, ability to independently navigate online platforms, the ability to learn through mediated experiences, requires personal time management, which is critical for the success of students who are choosing to learn online. Again, we're thinking about this kind of model adult learner in a graduate program, not the general public to whom we have a legal responsibility to meet their learning needs. And so instructors who do experience success in this very niche model are provided time to develop the course that can be delivered in 2 modes. They're provided support in instructional design. They work in classrooms that are invested in lots of technology. And in fact, it's actually labor intensive and expensive. It's not meant to cut costs, and it doesn't work in that way. And even when applying this model in the context of, there was a study on social work educators, it found that even though students might have thought that they would have preferred to learn in person, their intent didn't always match their practice. And what was really the barrier was actually not distance, but time. And it was actually asynchronous approaches in this context that were more successful. And so the conclusion of this particular study was that HiFlex was not ideal for all classes, institutions, or contexts, again, in a university, specifically university setting. And so there's been, of course, attempts to popularize the model, as I mentioned, and it hasn't been taken up because of the challenges that are associated with the model of delivery. So we're looking at student readiness, instructor preparation, and a significant upfront cost to outfit classrooms with the technology needed. So this is not a mic and a headset. I need to make that clear. Under COVID-19, we've seen this model go a bit more mainstream, especially in the United States, with a significantly underfunded public education system. But in Ontario, we had a number of school boards last year, starting with Upper Canada District, that had set precedent. And a collaborative study, speaking of data, and Shamila had referenced this in her introduction, there was a collaborative study that was released by the Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton school boards, including York Region. And in the study, it was noted that there was no data available from school boards on the percentage of students who were experiencing hybrid learning. And so it's important to note that without the data, we can't determine its impact, and we can't determine its the impact of this model on students and educational inequality. So I think that's something that I want to emphasize as well. Again, regions like York District, especially York Region, implies that it's better to find solutions than to complain. But this is not, I don't want to frame this as a complaint. I want to frame this as a demand for quality public education for students. It's not education for a small segment of students who are self-directed, well-resourced, who might learn despite their teachers. It's a demand to stop online learning, using online learning as a spatial fix by school boards. And by this, I refer to the fact that by their own admission, school boards are relying on the split attention model because they can't afford to make online learning work effectively. Because if you do require making it work, it requires more money than it costs to deliver education in person. And it's, combining 2 spaces into one, essentially. Again, it's important to remember that this is the context of public education system. It's already underfunded, and we haven't received funds to continue delivering remote instruction. We're the only jurisdiction in Canada that has a policy requirement mandating school boards to offer full-time remote instruction. And so, my own research into the experiences of teachers really highlight the role that crisis management plays in all of this, and that oftentimes politicians Folks with authority to make decisions will not often align with public expectations. And so it's important that we continue to even though it might not feel like you're getting immediate gain, to continue pushing back against these policies. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Behan. I hear you all the time in different venues and different Zoom meetings and different things, but every time I learn something new. So I appreciate that. We are going to move on and talk a little bit about the data that we collected and that we were hoping to present at the board meeting tomorrow night. So I'm just going to start here. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So in anticipation of our delegation, excuse me, at the YRDSB board meeting, which should have been taking place tomorrow evening, we collaborated with a group of teachers who formed York Region Public Education Workers. We created a Google form to collect data on the impact of the hybrid model so far. So we're in, at that point, I think we had only been in about 2 or 3 weeks. We shared the form through various Facebook groups, social media contacts, and email, and received 550 responses from YRDSB educators, parents, and secondary students. We also held a virtual town hall to gather more input from YRDSB families and educators in all 4 areas of York Region. We were well represented from the north, south, east, and west. We had breakout rooms, and about 45 of us shared our experiences, observations, and concerns. Every single person described negative impacts of the hybrid model, and we collected about 120 comments that evening. All of the data made it abundantly clear that the hybrid model is not working for anyone. And in an effort to be fully transparent, we're now going to share some of those data that we collected. So what you're going to see is from the Google form that we had, and then when you first entered the Zoom, you probably, or the YouTube, you may have seen some quotes that we had, and those were from the town hall that we had. So, sorry, I'm just going to shift my thing here. So we're going to take a look at the data, and you'll see that we're, just give me 1 second to shift here. So from our Google form respondents, as I said, we had 550. Oh, this is small. For elementary teachers, we had 265 teachers respond. We had 37 who identified as teachers and parents at the same time. Keepin members, we had 13 who identified that way, and then parents, 210, and retired teachers and grandparents and other, there were a couple who didn't identify with any of our categories. There were 25 in that group. So you can see the breakdown. So definitely our largest groups were the elementary teachers and parents. And I think there were also some secondary teachers in the green group and possibly the red group as well. But I just want to say that we had asked, we were really focusing on elementary school data for this because OSSTF D16 had also sent out a questionnaire, I believe, or Google form, I can't remember, but so they were collecting their own data, and we didn't want to, there was no need for both groups to be doing that. So we really were just focusing on elementary for this purpose. Vanessa, if you can just switch to the next one, please. So the top 5 concerns with the hybrid model, you'll see came up as not a surprise, is the split attention and increased workload for teachers. And then the next one was quality of learning, and just a really big one. Almost everybody, well, I'd say about half of the people were saying equity for students. And that was actually, I'd say equity came up a lot more in our town hall. I think when we had a chance to discuss it, that's when it really became apparent that teachers were definitely seeing inequitable situations. The third is mental health of teachers and or students. The next one is technology glitches and inadequacies. And we know, I mean, I see it all the time on Twitter where people are constantly talking about the tech problems. I think even last year, you know, it's par for the course. I think it's to be expected. Safety, privacy for teachers and or students. That's another big one. So in total, we had 816 comments altogether. And I'm just going to show you on the next slide, we'll show you the breakdown in a visual format. So just a little, so basically what this shows is that for all of the different groups, the tech issues are there, but they're a smaller proportion. So really what we're seeing, what we're hearing and seeing from teachers and parents, is that the main issues are the split attention, and that really the virtual students are not feeling connected to the classroom. So I know that was YRDSB's, that was one of the reasons that they chose this model. But the reality is that students are not feeling connected to the classrooms. They're feeling disconnected because they're not interacting with their peers who are in person. And then the other big one, obviously, is the quality of learning. So that came up a lot when I was reading the comments. I just think that it's just really obvious that a lot of students are need to make up they need to make some gains this year. This is now our third year in this pandemic, in whether just a couple of months in the first year, and then all of last year, and then now the beginning of this year as well. And it's not a surprise to see that there are going to be some students who are falling behind, some students who are going to need that extra push to bring them back up to speed. And it's just pretty much impossible, I think, for teachers to be able to do that at the same time in a hybrid model. So that's what we're hearing a lot from teachers and parents. And then we had a few secondary students who replied as well, and that's what they're feeling, just very disconnected from it, which goes to show that the reasons that YRDSB chose this model are not, they're not really valid. It's not the reality. That's not what's happening for our students, and certainly not what's in. It's completely at the expense of our educators who are our frontliners and doing, trying everything, and then having a lot of guilt because they feel like they are failing our students. And obviously that brings all the mental health issues. So you'll see the gray areas, which is mental health, and every group had concerns around that as well. We're seeing it, I'm hearing it from a lot of people about the mental health issues, and the stress leaves have started already. I've seen people predicting that, by Thanksgiving and definitely by the Christmas holidays, we're going to see a lot more of that. I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping that we can reverse this and get back on track with having dedicated virtual school and dedicated face-to-face schools, so that we can have good mental and physical health for our students and educators. Ria, I think I'm turning it back. Is that the last slide? Yeah. So Ria, I'll just turn it back to you, I think.
Thank you, Shamila. So as you all can see, the numbers really put in perspective how large of an issue this really is. I mean, just having over 500 respondents to this survey really puts in perspective how people are really frustrated with this model, and it's dysfunctional. It doesn't serve students right. It doesn't serve educators. And so just to kind of put a face behind these responses and show you kind of those personal anecdotes and experiences that truly help you visualize what it's really like being in a classroom. We have some amazing students, educators, and parents joining us today to share their experiences with us. So I'd like to introduce two amazing students. We have Jordana, who is a grade 12 student in the Catholic board, and Mayloon, who is a grade 10 student in YRDSB. So thank you so much for joining us, Mayloon and Jordana. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Hi. Good. Thanks for joining us. So first and foremost, I just wanted to start off more generally. If you could just tell us a little bit about your experience learning ever since the pandemic began, and more generally, your experience with the hybrid model. So I guess we'll start with Mayloon.
All right. So last year, my learning experience was hybrid learning. So most students were online for a few days and then went back to class in person, but only for the morning, and then we returned to online. This year, I'm doing fully in person, and the difference has been drastic. It's very noticeable. Online, there just wasn't any communication between students and each other, and students and teacher. Again, as mentioned throughout the presentation, it just felt like there was no sense of community. And because I was in grade 9, I think it really impacted first year students in high school a lot, because that's the age that you come in and you expect to make friends, to know how high school is really like. And I feel like they really got cheated of that experience. And it was really difficult for newcomer students to make friends as well. And then when I came to in person this year, the difference in interaction when learning was also huge. As a person who is enrolled in courses like musical theater, it relies a lot on interaction. And I feel like with the hybrid model, there just wasn't as much as of that like hands-on learning happening. And especially in a course like music theater, like the hybrid kids, they're not getting the full experience that they could be getting with the performing arts. And classes like science is just as hard because the in-person experiments, it's just not being done. I remember walking into class, there's this girl who used to be hybrid. She switched back online this year. I mean, she switched from hybrid to in-person, and she came in and she was just running around trying to catch up on all the information she missed, asking everyone if they could just help her with some of the notes. That just really shows that there is like a knowledge gap between what students receive online and in person.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to, the survey where a lot of people were concerned about that inequity. A lot of learning opportunities can't necessarily be replicated online. And then you have that miscommunication. You don't have as much of that community feeling and that bonding that a lot of people look forward to, especially as you begin a new transition into high school. So that's completely understandable. And I would just like to say, from my perspective as a student who used to be in the YRDSB, I have to honestly commend you, both of you, for getting through high school in a very difficult time. I can't imagine what it would have been like. And I know it's been difficult for you all and also for educators. So thank you for joining us in this conversation, of course. Jordana, I'll hand it off to you. What about your experience with the hybrid model?
It was very hard going from 4 courses a day, seeing your friends, seeing your teachers, being in person, to then doing everything from like your kitchen table, 2.5-hour courses. It was near impossible to stay focused for that long. It still is now. But just like doing it from your kitchen table, you weren't getting that experience. And I was in grade 11 at the time, and these are the marks that were possibly going to university if I'm doing early acceptance. So I feel like it was just like a lot of people were robbed of this high school experience, their marks, their just like your mental health. It was all impacted, and it did not feel good at all. It was too much to just go from a normal life, seeing your friends, seeing your teachers, to being at home by yourself. It was a big change. It was a really big change.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate how you touched upon, mental health. Recently, a lot of student organizations especially have been advocating for more mental health resources available in schools and just the overall accessibility to these resources. So on the topic of mental health, how has this learning model kind of impacted your mental health or your peers' mental health?
It definitely impacted all of us in the negative. I don't think anyone would say this is like helping them out. And especially now, like I'm applying to university soon, and it's too much. Like I'm going from sitting like in a class for 2.5 hours. Now I'm going in lectures, and it's just completely different. So I feel like all of our mental health just took like a really big hit. Even the teachers too, like all of us, it's too much, especially with these 2.5-hour classes. Like this is not good for anyone.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of screen time. And of course, a lot of educators are spreading themselves thin, trying to manage students that are in the classroom and simultaneously manage students online as well. Mayloon, did you want to touch upon the mental health aspect?
Yeah, for sure. A big part of the mental health aspect that I've been getting is a lot of students have been coming up to me and like just talking about how after coming out of hybrid and going back in person, a lot of them have a sort of like social anxiety where because they have been online for so long and now they have to go out and work with people, talk with people, suddenly group projects in person are a thing. And they just feel like they have such a hard time, like, talking and communicating with people because they have been like so used to working by themselves. And I think that's just really bad from a mental health state, but also from like a learning stage, because this is the age where teens are supposed to learn how to interact with their community. But what interaction are they getting if they're just trapped online?
Absolutely. And that's a really great way of putting it. And I guess, the benefit in having these conversations then and voicing student concerns is we hope that they will be listened to. Unfortunately, we have a history of student voice just not being listened to at all. And it's often perceived as more of an illusion in our school boards, and it's quite performative in many ways. So I guess, this is a really big question, but if you had all of the key decision makers watching this live stream right now, and you could ask them of one thing or several things, what would it be? What can we do to make your experience in school a little bit easier, at least a little bit easier? I'll start with Milu.
That definitely is a big question. I think that, in my opinion, just to make the school experience easier for everyone is to find a better model or a better way to implement the hybrid model in a way that students can socialize with each other more. Because I think the main issues that I've been experiencing and a lot of my friends have been experiencing is definitely the socializing aspect, and to like make the learning gap between hybrid students and in-person students smaller, because that's also a big aspect, is that there is a learning gap present. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jordana, what are your thoughts?
I would just say to listen to the teachers and the students, because majority of us are all on the same page with the 2.5 hour classes and like the week 1, week 2, and a lot of teachers and a lot of my friends are just like, it's not working. Like we do 2.5 hours in one class, that's like 2 to 3 lessons, and then we take a break for an entire week, and then we go back, and these poor teachers are spending all this time going over what we did the week before. We're losing so much class time. Teachers are losing teaching time. It's just, they should like really listen to what the community is saying, because a lot of us are on the same page.
Absolutely. And that's a great message. A lot of stakeholders have been super vocal about their concerns, like throughout the entire process, even before it was implemented. And so, to not listen to those stakeholders and to not even consult in the first place. And I guess this is another question for you. Has anyone ever asked you personally how you felt about the hybrid model before it was implemented as a student? Has anyone gathered your feedback on this? So that says a lot, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever model we take in our education system is what best serves students, and students have always been the priority. And the fact that students have not even been consulted on this issue is at the root, the main issue right here, right? So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you, sharing your perspectives and your experiences. This is, one step closer to student voice actually being considered and acknowledged, and not just listened to, but implemented when it comes to making key decisions that impact all students in both boards. So thank you so much for joining and sharing your insights. And with that, the lovely Shamila is back on the screen, so I will pass it to her for our parents panel.
Thank you, Jordana and Milan and Ria. That was great. It's always so powerful to get the youth perspective, and I totally agree. I think that that's another area that the board has failed, because we talk about, and they talk about the importance of the youth voice, but the fact that they haven't been asked about the hybrid model is not great, as you said. Now I'd like to introduce a parent that we have on our panel, Lindsay. We were actually supposed to have another parent join Lindsay and I, Colleen, and unfortunately she's had a family matter come up, and so she won't be able to join us. So we'll just have a little intimate discussion with, hello, Lindsay.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm just going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences with the hybrid model.
Well, I'm more going to basically, I have two kids that it didn't work for similar and different reasons. Both of my kids have identified for having ADHD, for being gifted with LDs, and also have anxiety and mental health issues before the pandemic. So you put the pandemic, and then now all of that has happened to them because of that. With the online learning, it's like a recipe for disaster. It was not a good year last year, and my kids are 7 years apart. So I had a grade 1 student last year going back and forth from learning to online every time lockdown. And then I had a son in grade 8 who was online all year because he had a situation where he just didn't get along with, there was a bad situation with students. So that was the only good thing about it, but that was it. And even with my daughter, she actually did speak up for herself, and she told the school principal at 7 years old that she hated online learning more than hate. And she ended up going on strike. And I had to fill out a form because she was like, because I was basically turned into her teacher, because she doesn't, like a grade 1 student, they were expected to type and hand in this stuff. And I'm saying to my husband, like, I'm watching this, and I said, how are these grade 1 students able to hand this stuff in so quickly? And he's like, well, you don't see what they're handing in. And I'm like, that's a good point. And it really put, my daughter already has anxiety. She's very brilliant, but doesn't know it. And she was having a hard time reading and behind already. So when it puts a spotlight on the kids, because when the online kids, you see them reading, you see them answering, and it's a screen and one child on the screens. And she saw there was 9 kids that were like, they had been learning all year. So when the kids that were going back and forth from being in school to online, I could tell that the online kids, it worked for some of them, but the kids that were used to in person, they were very uncomfortable, and they were watching these kids, and the teacher was having the hardest time, especially when it was online. Like Skylar sometimes would stay home, so we would do online, and I would see what was happening. And, the teacher was dealing with the kids in grade 1 not paying attention. So then the kids online were sitting there, and it was just, it ended up being like, 2 different classrooms, which is not right for kids, especially at a young age. And so I became her teacher, because I am an at-home mom, and everyone's like, oh, this is great, you're at home. I'm like, no. I became her full-time teacher. I found out I maybe should have been a teacher, but who I shouldn't be a teacher to is my daughter, because it affected our relationship. And she's like, no, you're my mom, you're not my teacher. So it just didn't work. She's behind now. She's uncomfortable in class. She used to love school, and now she's wanting to stay home a lot. And it's been a huge struggle. With my son, he actually isn't as behind as he should be, because he had a remarkable teacher, but the teacher, by the end of the year, he was a mess. And he gave my son a lot of he retired. He did early, I think he was able to get early retirement. And he's a remarkable teacher. He did so much one-on-one help with my son, and he really should get a teaching award. But the amount of prep time he must have had, I know he did, it took away his personal time with his family, and then burnt him out by the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So what I saw that the teachers had to go through, and my kids, it didn't work. And if York does do a hybrid model, I would take, my son actually is now TDSB, but I would take my daughter out, because I feel that strongly against it. She needs the connections. That's how little kids learn how to learn. And I don't think it's right. So I feel very strongly about it. And I'm sure my 1-year-old would come to the screen right now and tell you what she thinks about it.
Yeah, no, and that's what we are hearing. That's what we're seeing from our data that we collected. We're definitely seeing, everything that you talked about. I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of having kids going back and forth. So you mentioned that they could go back and forth. I think in your Catholic, that was last year, right?
Yes, that was because of the lockdowns. Yeah.
Yeah. But even like for the hybrid model, so it's the same with YRDSB. If, again, this is touted as a strength and a positive of the hybrid model. And it's probably the only one that I can think of where, there is something positive to say about it, is that, if a kid is having symptoms or has had possible exposure, that they can switch to hybrid if that's already in place in the classroom. So I just want to get your sense around that. Like, do you feel like the benefits of having that as the option to go, to still be able to be connected to the classroom? Do you see that as a real benefit for a child's learning? Or would you rather have seen, like in the good old days where teachers give work, either send it home with a sibling or a friend, and eventually the kids catch up, right? So even though they're not tuning in every day. So I just wanted to get your thoughts around that.
I think maybe if I compare both of my kids, again, having a daughter saying about her strong feelings against online learning, no, but maybe that would have been, some work brought home. For elementary kids, I think if they're exposed, and then so you have a small amount of kids online, and also to what your student said, is because my son is now in high school with having ADHD, these 2.5 hour classrooms, like he comes home, he's done.
Yeah.
He's cooked and he's supposed to do homework, and he's so behind and overwhelmed, and he's like math for 2.5 hours, and then he has geography for 2.5 hours. He's like,
it's not it. I know.
It's not. And for having ADHD, like he actually has, I got permission for him to be able to get up and walk around a bit in the halls because it's too much.
Yes, I've got 2 in high school as well. And generally they're, decent students. They try really hard, but they're finding the 2.5 hours really brutal.
Yeah. Oh, he's trying.
Yeah.
It's just not working.
I think they're all trying. It's just a long stretch. And again, that's something that we're really pushing hard for, is to have that, get the kids back to a normal 4 or 5 period schedule, so they can have staggered lunches and they're not all crammed in, especially now that the weather's getting colder, right? And I feel for the grade 9 students who, this is their first year of high school. He doesn't even know, he hasn't experienced what it should be like yet in terms of having the 4 classes at a time, but he's gonna love it after having these the 2.
I think it'll seem good. And also about the arts thing, my kids actually, so the York school they go to is an art school, and again they mostly got cut off because of COVID, but I can't imagine, like, my daughter's amazing at art and she doesn't even like online art, but yet she's exceptional in art. And my son was drama, so how are you going to do drama online? I don't get it.
Yeah, and again, that's another, it came out a lot as I was reading through all the comments, is that the students in the arts, so music, drama, and the arts are really suffering. And it's just, we need to figure out how to do this without a hybrid model, so that the kids are learning properly. So.
And that's what gets my kids to school. So when I don't have that, it's a fun morning.
And have you reached out to trustees? I just want to encourage everybody who's watching, and that's my thing, is always to just encourage people to build that relationship with your trustee. And were you able to kind of make that connection with your trustee or senior board staff at all, or superintendents or anybody?
I haven't. I had other things because of my kids having issues with their LDs. That's the thing that I have to make sure is working in terms of the amount of help they're getting. Yeah. So that's where I've had to reach out, but I would definitely now because of this, think of writing a letter and saying like, this isn't this, like, I understand why it had to be done because of the pandemic, but this, like, for being, regular learning, I don't agree with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for joining us.
Welcome.
And I'm just going to turn it back to Ria we're going to move on to have a quick discussion with teachers.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay, once again. You're just so captivating and easy to listen to. So thank you for that. We would now like to introduce two educators to share their experiences with the hybrid model. Jamal Warda is a secondary drama teacher who is currently in his second year of teaching through the hybrid model. And Mary Marcello is an elementary core resource teacher who taught hybrid to a combined primary class last year. So thank you both for joining us. I think Mary is just coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Hi, Mary. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So first off, if we could just generally ask of you, what were some of the main challenges that you faced teaching through the hybrid model? So I guess we'll start with Jamal.
Thanks, Ria. It's great to hear from students and parents mention the arts and the challenge that everyone experiences within the hybrid model. I teach drama, as you mentioned. To pivot to hybrid within that discipline, incredibly challenging. To take something that's supposed to exist in person, that is supposed to be collaborative, and to kind of transfer that into a hybrid model, which plainly does not work. And so you have students who are at home, who are doing something completely different than the students who are with you in person. And within that discipline, it's not easy to just say, well, here's some work. While you do that, I'm going to look at and work with the students online. It's just sitting and waiting. At any one given time, there's students either waiting online or they're waiting for you in person. So that was the biggest challenge, and how you constantly felt. I've constantly felt that I wasn't doing them any good here. Like, it was just, we're all just kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and you just kind of felt like you're failing every day. And so that was the biggest struggle every day. It's trying to figure out how to make this work when it really can't. But making it seem like it's a worthwhile experience for the students at the same time. So I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely. And your comment about how you feel like you're failing as an educator, that's something that we've seen as a very common statement, throughout the survey, throughout respondents. And it's something that, obviously from this perspective, sitting here, we can tell you that no, you're not failing as an educator. You've just been placed in a very difficult circumstance that's difficult for anyone to navigate. And you've been placed in this area with extremely high expectations without the tools, the resources, and even the support to deal with it, right? So you're definitely not failing as an educator. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people will consider you as a hero in terms of navigating this very difficult time. So thank you, Jamal, for everything you do. Mary, what about you?
So yes, I last year I was teaching a combined grade 2-3 class. So if I may, I just want you to envision, I don't have my shield here, but I'm actually still at work. So teachers are wearing the mask, wearing the microphone, usually have a shield. Today I have goggles. And I had grade 2 students, so my glasses are fogging up. I have grade 2 students online, grade 2 students in class, grade 3 students online, grade 3 students in class. And I have announcements that go on. I have to ensure, physical distancing, and I have to assist the navigation of the online learning environment with grade 2-3 students. I am not certain what's happening in their home environment. I'm going to remove these because I really can't see right now. And I'm very limited in my mobility as well, because if I walk over to assist someone in class, then I've walked away from the person online who is going to need my assistance. There's a lot of time wasted waiting. Just give me a moment. I'm just helping so-and-so. Just give me a moment. And although that occurs in an in-person environment or in-class learning environment, it is beyond exhausting in a hybrid model. I need to tell you that listening to the mom, Jamal, and the students, it brought back a lot of anxiety in my heart this evening. Educators are really living a more intense life with the hybrid model. Pandemic exhaustion is very real, and hybrid is a complete disaster. And Shamila, I know you used that word when you described it. I felt that not only was I failing my students, their parents, my family, but I felt like I was failing myself. I was glued to a screen, not only for teaching, but for planning, because you had to ensure that you were able to, whatever you were going to implement in the classroom, you were going to implement online. So I was planning all hours, marking, providing feedback. And when I wasn't doing that, and trying to ensure safety through all of that, like it was, you know, a lot of times that the cameras were off. And so you're, you know, so-and-so, are you there? Unmute your mic, are you there? And then you're trying to engage with those students, but they're either not there or their home environment is not conducive to be able to unmute their mic at that moment. And so that's a factor that we're not recognizing either. And then you have students waiting for you. That the hybrid model in a combined primary grade was beyond painful for me. And then when I walked away from my teacher duties, I immediately became a mom to my 3 children. And I had to step into that role and be, and I'm concerned about their own mental health. So, you know, my workload, in addition to my personal life and to my personal and family obligations, left me with very little time to sleep. And so being sleep deprived really affected my life, because I was working late into the night, and there are constantly layers of worry present. You know, you're worried, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed by the challenges we're facing. And then it's almost as if we have to accept this as being normal, and we shouldn't. And we talk about mental health, but do we have time to support our mental health and the mental health of our students? And so, you know, all COVID really did was reveal what's wrong with our education system. It just revealed the gaps. You know, we're demanding for smaller class sizes. This reveals the need to have smaller class sizes. You know, the expanding role of technology, the role of the teacher is getting greater and greater. So there's a lot of frustration with the hybrid model. And I think everyone has touched upon so many different components of it this evening.
Thank you, Mary. You've touched on so many points like that Ria and I were going to ask about, but you just covered them all, which is awesome.
I'm very passionate about hybrid, and it needs to go.
And I just want to ask both of you, what do you think in going forward, like, you know, do you see a danger in kind of, Mary, I think you touched on this, about normalizing this crisis learning model for our education system going forward? Do you see this happening? You know, is this something that we as parents and families should be worried about in our education system? Because it is a disaster.
Absolutely. I really think we need to push for adequate funding. I think it's possible to have adequate funding so that we can ensure a safe learning environment with quality education. And this is not quality. We are not being given the tools to provide quality education at this time.
I agree. Jamal?
Yeah, just to add to that, I do share that feeling, Shamila, because I think what's being sold to the public by those who don't actually do the work is the convenience of it. Oh, you know what, they'll just pivot that word, you know, you can't be here one day, the next you just log online. And it's so much more challenging than that. I'm experiencing it now so far in the month and a half that we've been even within in person of, at least within that discipline, like in drama, evaluations, performance is going on, and the students not showing up today, and then it's like puts hold on everything, or somebody's on away for a few days, and it's how do you make up for something they were doing in class to then now pivot to something online? It just it doesn't work. And so I do fear that if those who don't know, well, of course, if you're like, oh yeah, you're absent one day, just log on online, which is not the case. So I really do hope that more people mobilize and lend their voice to this, so that those who are making the decisions just kind of see the reality for what it is, and create opportunities for those students who do want to learn remotely, as Shamila, you pointed out earlier, because they are students, very small percentage, but I have some students share with me that they do actually prefer online. But let's create that distinct remote online model for them, and then create a place for the vast majority who prefer in person, but not bring the two together. So hopefully those people are listening, or that message is made clear to them even more so.
Definitely. Thank you both. That was awesome. And again, I think when we talk about families being impacted by this hybrid model, we're not talking just about families like those of us who have students in the system. We're talking about families of our educators too, because this has to have an impact on you. I get exhausted just hearing about what teachers are doing in the classroom. But then that thought of, you have your own families, many have their own children, and they need you just as much as those kids in the classroom need you all day, right? So it's challenging, and it's really it's just so unfair. And kudos to both of you. I know, Jamal, this is your second year now of hybrid, right, at the secondary level, and it's exhausting. So we feel for you, and I hope that you know that parents are supportive. We understand that this is a struggle, and we're doing what we can to advocate for students and educators, because this needs to change.
Shamila, can I just add one thing to that comment? The night that I found out that York Catholic was going to continue to implement the hybrid model originally, I drove home in tears. I was devastated to think that I had to do hybrid one more year. And I sat there and I thought, what do I do? Because I love teaching. I'm very passionate about teaching. And I struggled with the challenges that hybrid presented. And so it was that night that I chose to put my name forward for a special ed position as opposed to a classroom position, because I thought I could continue to teach in a smaller group and not have to deal with the hybrid.
Yeah, I'm hearing that from a lot of educators, where they're having to make those tough decisions just for their own mental health and their own just functioning for their own families, right? Like, just what you have to do, what works best for you. But it's unfortunate that it's the teachers who are having to make all these compromises, and they're not the ones that signed up for this. They're not the ones who have made this decision. It's very, very frustrating. I know I use that word a lot, but there's no other way to put it. So thank you both again. We're just going to hear a little bit, hopefully one or two statements from YRDSB teachers who have been courageous enough to provide us with statements. They didn't feel comfortable being here this evening, with good reason. I think they're exhausted, emotionally drained, and they just felt like they would be happy if Ria and I can just share their thoughts. So I'm hoping that we have a slide too, because I don't know if I have it. Ria, do you have that?
We have the statement available, but the first one, and I can of course post these afterwards on our social media accounts so that you all can take a look as well. But the first impact statement that we'll be sharing is from a teacher who we really admire for her courage and her dedication to her profession and to her students. It's very clear that the hybrid model has taken a tremendous toll on her mental health. And as you listen to this statement, keep in mind that this is a real person with real feelings, and she has a family of her own, a passion for teaching, and deep concerns with the decisions that are being made by senior board staff and trustees in our school board. So I'll just be reading this statement. I'm an experienced and confident teacher, and this has been the hardest year of my career. I love teaching kids the curriculum and how to be a good friend and a good citizen, but also teaching them how to learn about themselves so they can advocate for what they need. I knew this year would be challenging, but I didn't realize it was going to throw me into a constant state of anxiety where I was waking up at 4 a.m. in a full-on panic attack. Most days I'd enter the house crying, my husband ready with a glass of wine and my child ready with a hug. Over dinner, I'd spill my heart out about the inequities, the privacy breaches, the tech that didn't work that day, and the students' lack of self-regulation after being off of school for so long. I'd lament about the bored looks on the kids' faces as they wait for me to problem shoot what had suddenly stopped working after it had been working no problem for days. I'd explain how I could feel my blood pressure rising as I tried to solve a recess problem in math class or tried to settle down escalated students, all the while knowing that parents were all hearing stuff they had no right to hear and assuming they just wanted me to teach math, as the rest of the social skill teaching I was doing was not relevant to their child at home. I'd relay how many times we had to stop for a student who regularly had outbursts and how many times we needed to evacuate that day. Then one Sunday night, I felt nauseated and my hands were shaking so badly, I found it hard to write out my lesson plans. I was irritable with the people who loved me the most in the world because I was absolutely dreading going to school, a place where I was set up to fail daily while a bunch of parents watched me. It's a terribly overwhelming feeling to know that you are failing daily, every day. And no matter what you do, the best you can hope for is a day where you can keep it together long enough to cry on the way home and not in the staff room in front of your colleagues. So I made an appointment to see my doctor, who noted that I had fought hard by writing letters and emails. I was speaking to the people in charge and asking for more resources, better technology, and a boost to the Wi-Fi. I worked with experts, worked 14-hour days, and was barely sleeping. What I described sounded like I was going into a war zone daily. My body felt so unsafe, it was in a constant fight or flight state. Then she explained I had no more fight in me, and when you can't successfully fight something and you still feel unsafe, your body says enough is enough, it's time to flee. And flee I did. I'm now on a stress leave, feeling guilty like a failure and with a lot of time to reflect on what I could have done differently. But then I wonder if any of the senior board staff are lying in bed feeling sick to their stomachs. Were they having panic attacks due to the decisions they made? I came to the conclusion that they must not be, or they would have found a better way, like all the other boards did, or reversed their decision and ended hybrid by now. I should not feel guilty for not being able to fix a system they broke and couldn't even bother to provide me with the appropriate tools to put back together. In 2 years, YRDSB has destroyed their reputation as a stellar and upstanding board that demonstrated care and empathy for their students and staff. Moreover, they have destroyed their relationships with parents, students, and their own staff by ignoring what families and educators have clearly been saying the whole time. Hybrid is the worst thing to happen to YRDSB. Enough is enough. Hybrid has to go, and it has to go now. So this statement, so emotional and just really puts in perspective the struggles that a lot of educators are facing and struggles that they're facing, oftentimes alone.
Definitely. Yeah. And I know you read that I know this teacher, and I know she would appreciate having her voice heard. I'm going to read one more too. I know we're running short on time, but I feel like it's important to end with these powerful voices of our teachers. So I'll read out this one. I am deeply concerned about how I will survive teaching kindergarten children in the hybrid model, which involves splitting my attention constantly. I am also deeply concerned about the quality of education my own 2 children are receiving in the hybrid model of learning. While the pandemic has made things exceedingly challenging, and while I try hard to appreciate and understand why decisions are made at a board level, I am truly anxious and worried about my children's learning this way. As a parent, my children are my first priority. I must advocate for them. As a teacher, my students are also a priority. I must advocate for them. I understand that there are some decisions imposed on our school board by the Ministry of Education. The hybrid model was not mandated. YRDSB chose this model. It causes children at home and children in class to lose out on much needed focus and attention. It requires an educator to split their time and attention, manage tech issues, learn how to teach in this model, which was not sufficiently provided by the board at all, creates safety issues, and degrades the quality of instruction. It is a disaster. An educator cannot sustain this learning model. If you truly care about all educators and their physical and mental health, you must reverse this decision. You will break the good teachers and the amazing teachers. You will erode our passion, spark, and love for the profession. While I pride myself in understanding tech enough to get by, there are others that are drowning. We were given little to no training. Additional professional development opportunities were also a disaster. We have families and lives. We must have time to recharge. We're barely getting by. Educators are exhausted already, and it's only the middle of October. You will have many taking mental health leaves and will have prep payback that will become unmanageable as you'll lose willing supply teachers. You've already lost students to private schools and to the Catholic boards because of the hybrid model. I know deep down you must all struggle with this decision that some of you had a hand in making. It is simply not right. While the board has emphasized feedback from parents to allow children to stay connected to their home schools as the primary reason for changing to hybrid, this is not really the reason. As fellow current and past educators, you must be able to empathize with the barriers that we're facing. You must know this is not sustainable. You must know that this is wrong on many, many levels. Hybrid must end. There has to be a better solution. That's that one. Thank you. We can move along to the next thing.
Yes, I think if we can move along to our action points, because after having this conversation, and of course, a lot of you who are watching today, I'm assuming you're watching because you're also frustrated with this model and you want to see a change. So what are our next steps? One is reach out to your MPP, your school board trustees, and let them know that you say no to hybrid. If you follow the link here, linktree/York Communities for Public Ed, we have the contact information for all of these people available readily for you. Also, we would really appreciate it if you could join us in a Twitter storm. So share your own concerns, your own insights, your own personal anecdotes. We'd love to hear from you. Tag us. And of course, use the hashtags #NoHybrid, YRDSB, YCDSB, and Hybrid Hurts Kids. Shamila, anything else you'd like to add?
Nope. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening. Let's keep the conversations going. Keep the pressure on your trustees. I know that they keep saying it's an operational decision, but they're making decisions, and other boards, trustees have been making these types of decisions to have the hybrid model reversed. So let's keep the pressure on them. Keep talking to your superintendents, your principals, and senior board staff. Whoever will listen, we need to make sure that we're not silenced on this issue.
Thank you all so much.